Gender and Health by Jaden Kilby. I recently read an article called Gender and Health by the World Health Organization, and this article discussed the male and female gender and how their health can be impacted by the social construction of gender. This is a topic that I find very interesting, so I decided to look a little bit deeper into it. This article claims that harmful gender norms, especially those related to rigid notions of masculinity, can also affect boys' and men's health and well-being negatively, and gender inequality and discrimination faced by women and girls puts their health and well-being at risk. Throughout this presentation, I will be discussing the meaning behind these quotes in relation to class content. Gender roles. Gender roles is basically the concept of how one should dress, act, behave, and present themselves based on their assigned sex. I will discuss this later on, but a quick example is that women should be nurturing, they should be the caretakers of the family and the home, they should be polite, and they should dress in a feminine way, skirts, dresses, etc., and that they should not be assertive nor independent. And that men should be strong, dominating, they should be the providers for the family, and they should not cry or show their emotions. Here's a diagram that I found by Jackpat, and it gives you a little bit of a better idea of the different roles that the husband and the wife carry around the house. It shows you that the men are usually the ones who provide, and they're expected to provide for the family, and the women are the ones who do the household chores, the cooking, things like that. Traditionally, men and women have opposing roles, therefore they are compared to one another. The gender hierarchy. In order to understand why different genders have different health outcomes, the gender hierarchy needs to be further understood. The relationship between men and women is not actually a very simple relationship. They are not just two social groups that are neutrally distinguished to one another. They are actually ranked and evaluated based on different masculine norms and different behaviors. Ideas that represent the gender hierarchy. The social system generally favors males over females. Men are typically in charge over women. Men are viewed as dominating, strong, and powerful. Women are viewed as weak and submissive, which basically means that women should and are willing to conform to the authority of others, and by others, I mean men. It is very important to make sure that you understand that traditional masculinity is positioned directly against its opposite, idealized femininity. Traditional masculinity. Traditional masculinity is a very dominant and a very idealized form of masculinity that has been very publicly accepted. Traditional masculinity basically refers to what a man should act like and what a man should be. Some characteristics that are associated with the traditional masculinity are aggression, willingness to inflict bodily damage, dominance, strength, independence, power, acceptance of pain and injury, and self-sacrifice. These are the types of characteristics that many men try to embody as they try to and they want to conform to society's norms. As the World Health Organization mentioned, harmful gender norms, especially those that are related to the rigid notions of masculinity, can lead to health consequences and a negative overall well-being for boys and men. This is due to the fact that a large portion of men try to and want to be seen as a man, therefore they try their best to portray these different characteristics. This, along with the idea that traditional masculinity helps perpetuate the marginalization of men who do not necessarily fit into this category, lead to health consequences. A great example of traditional masculinity can be found in an article that I read for class called Wrestling with the Risks by Don Sabo in 2019. The example is bodybuilding. Bodybuilding is a prime example of an activity that allows men to mask their vulnerability, all while embodying these certain characteristics that make them feel more manly. Sabo 2019 explains that masculinity is equated to physical strength, and this is something that likely causes men to engage in risky behaviors such as extreme dieting, overtraining, and anabolic steroid use. This goes to show that men can sacrifice their own health in the pursuit of the ideal. This relates right back to one of the characteristics that I mentioned before, that men are willing to inflict bodily harm and they're willing to self-sacrifice to embody and be seen as a man, basically. And this links directly back to the World Health Organization's quote that says that these health consequences can be caused by rigid notions of masculinity, and bodybuilding is a great example of a rigid notion of masculinity. Men of color. As I learned in class, racialized groups are more likely to be poor and homeless, have lower levels of income and employment, experience more economic and social deprivation, and they are exposed to toxic and hazardous conditions in the workplace. This is all rooted from racism, and this, along with the prejudice that these men face, is enough to have very negative effects on their health. This can result from how men of color negotiate their masculine identity through a socio-political environment which allows them to negate their own male identity. Gay and bisexual men. As I previously mentioned, traditional masculinity helps perpetuate the marginalization of other men. And when I say other men, I mean men who do not necessarily fit into the categories or the characteristics of somebody who portrays traditional masculinity. Social groups have very clearly defined what is normal and what is not normal in regards to the male and female gender. Gay and bisexual men are subject to a lot of violence and a lot of prejudice due to the idea that they violate traditional gender norms. These men are often the victims of emotional confusion and distress due to the fact that they are not conforming to society's norms and that they are viewed as emotionally undesirable. Overall, rigid notions of masculinity can affect gay and bisexual men's health through the encouragement to conform to society's norms. Traditional femininity. Some people may think that the female gender is actually superior to the male gender due to the fact that they have more biological advantages over men, such as longer life expectancy, but it is actually quite the opposite. The social factors that have been created by society actually have a bigger impact on the female gender than the biological advantages that they hold over men. The greatest variations in men's and women's health is actually due to the social, economic, and cultural factors that they face, and because of this, the female gender is actually seen as inferior to the male gender. Traditional femininity or hegemonic femininity is a term that is used to describe and outline the characteristics that a female has or that they should portray in compliance to the male gender. Some characteristics of a traditional female: submissive, weak, sensitive, gentle, emotional, vulnerable, and modest. Traditionally, women are seen as caretakers, which means that they cook, they clean, and they attend to the needs and the desires of their husbands. The subordination of women by men is a phenomenon that is found in most countries, but it does vary from country to country. Next, we're going to look at some factors that affect the health of women. We can see that typically women spend a significant more amount of time in reproductive or unpaid labor, whereas men take more part in productive labor. Typically, men are seen as having a higher social status, and this is due to the fact that typically in most countries, men are seen more in productive and paid labor than women. This equates to them having a higher social status. Women often make less money than men for working the exact same job. Women make 81 cents for every dollar that a man makes, and this is something that affects women into their retirement as this pay gap affects their pension. Women have greater rates of unemployment and low occupational and social status due to the fact that they are heavily excluded in the labor world or in the labor market. It was shown that a fifth of women were not active in the labor market due to the fact that they have domestic responsibilities to take care of. This lack of inclusion in the labor market for women can lead to economic deprivation and possibly poverty. It can also lead to a lack of feeling like you're a part of something, like you're a part of society or integrated with society. Women of color. Women are definitely treated as inferior to men, but it has been shown in many areas that women are advancing. But as Wingfield 2020 mentioned, women of color still lag behind these advancements. As I just mentioned, women make 81 cents for every single dollar that a man makes, but it was shown that African American women make 64 cents for every dollar a man makes, and Latino women make 54 cents for every dollar that a man makes. Why does the pay gap exist? Women spend more time out of the labor market. Women engage in more unpaid work, such as caring and domestic activities. Women hold fewer management positions, and the segregation in the education and labor market means that female-dominated occupations often offer lower wages even when the same level of experience and education is needed.
Here is a diagram by pay scale that helps you understand a little bit better of the pay gap between women and women of different races, and this is all compared to white men.
I found an article that was done about Black women, and it showed how the discrimination that these women face depends on what position they hold in their jobs. It was shown that Black women who are doctors face a lot more gender bias in their jobs due to the fact that they are surrounded by their male counterparts. It was also shown that Black women who are nurses do not experience as much gender bias because this is not such a culturally masculinized space. These women face a lot more racism, direct racism, than gender bias. All the points that I just made about women in color affect their health because of the stressors that they face day to day between sexism and racism can cause a lot of psychological distress. All the information that I have provided relates directly back to the quotes that I found from the World Health Organization article. These quotes have been proven to be true through understanding how traditional masculinity can affect men's lives, as well as understanding how the social system values masculinity over femininity.